talk to your stakeholders, know what they want. If DEFRA commissions an evidence review on the effectiveness of an intervention, you have to work with them to navigate the complexities in producing research that is actionable. So the case that I'm presenting to you is what we've been working on for the past couple of years. And we've just completed this exercise. We call it mapping, and I'll explain to you what that means shortly. But the focus was on nature-based solutions to address the impacts of climate change. I'm not going to go into details to what that means, but the nature-based solutions term is a concept of framing to highlight actions, harnessing nature to address societal challenge. And we knew there was a growing body of evidence suggesting that, but no comprehensive review and synthesis had been done. So that's what we embarked on doing. So I'll use this case study to go through the process of systematic reviews. And the first very important step is coming up with the scope of the exercise, the scope which underpins your research questions. And to do that, you should engage your target audience. And I'll refer to that as stakeholder engagement. And often it's just more than an actual, it's not a passive audience, it's people who will use your information. And then there's the process of screening, searching, mapping. Again, I'll explain that. And finally, appraising and synthesizing studies to then disseminate the results in a simple format. And there's a range of tools and software which can help manage this process. Very quickly, yeah, this is important just to at least be aware of. You got to ask, do we have the right skills in the team? Obviously, overlaps with many of the skills for research. But beyond that, I think, yeah, there is the challenging task of managing the information flow through the process. A crucial aspect of a systematic review is to ensure that what you did is transparent and accountable. And so you need to record that process. And there is a lot of data to manage. You also need to be familiar with what databases there are, how to use them, how to develop search strings. And all of this can vary in complexity depending on the type of review. And librarians can help in helping you do that. And there is quite a lot of specialist software as well, which I'll go over. But I think that one of the crucial things to focus on is how you're going to synthesize your data. Beyond what is often termed a literature review, which is more of a thematic summary of the state of the art, if you will, you might want to do meta-analysis. You might want to synthesize approaches using a framework analysis. You need to know, you need to have the skills to do that, which is often why we do this in a team. So we started the process in the middle of 2018. And we're just finalizing the first draft for submission of the map, which is the first paper in the series. So just to give you an idea, so it takes a long time, at least to produce a comprehensive picture of the evidence base. This is especially the case when the nature of the research question is quite broad. And so this was the first step, and stemming from this output, we can ask an additional set of questions to synthesize subsets of information, and I'll go into detail a little bit later. So in general, through this stepwise process, you see a linear progression, but it is possible that some of the steps become a bit more iterative. You might start the process and realize that you need to expand your search to another database, for example. that you might think it's crazy to go through that given how many results we had initially, over 20,000. But it doesn't actually need to take that long necessarily. If your research question scope is narrow, it might be quicker. If you have a big team, you can split up the tasks and just hunker down for a few weeks. You know, you can also still harness the principles of systematic reviews to do a rapid, what's called a rapid evidence assessment, to do it in a way that is structured. This doesn't need to take as long. I mean, a lot of evidence-based, a lot of evidence reviews for policy, you know, you get like maybe 4 months, 3 to 5 months. So you can harness the principles of systematic reviewing to do that. IPBES, for example, doesn't do, IPBES doesn't do systematic reviewing in the traditional sense. It relies primarily on existing reviews. It synthesizes existing high-level synthesis in parallel with expert knowledge. But you don't want to cut too many corners if your task is to influence a policy decision which can directly affect lives, like in healthcare, as an example. So I mentioned earlier why you want to engage stakeholders. It's really about achieving impact, knowing your audience, making sure that whatever you deliver will be taken up. So in our case, we convened a panel of different people across academia, practice, and policy with a range of expertise that was relevant to the scope of our question. And it was crucial to first and foremost, agree on the scope of the exercise, to deliver on the needs of policymakers. You know, there's only so much the researchers leading the exercise know about what is needed. We honestly speaking, we know little about the context, the actual context, the constraints that the policymakers work under, their needs. So we need to have these dialogues. And this refines the scope. And over here on the context is represented by the images on the top right. This is the progression, these circles here up to 2050. That's the mechanism by which the Paris Agreement is supposed to achieve its objective. So if you want to feed into policy, you need to time it correctly. And our scope here is framed around the PICO structure, which means, so this is common for environmental syntheses and for systematic reviews in healthcare. You focus your question around the population of interest. Here we call that target group because I'm talking about people. And the intervention type that you're after. As you can see in our case, this is very broad because we're doing a very broad research question. And the comparator, so if you're looking for a specific type of methodology, studies following a specific methodology, you might want to make that a bit more specific. You might just want to encompass studies that used experimental approaches or had robust counts of actual assessments. And the outcome, of course, what is it that you're actually after? Because this will be very important for data extraction. You need to make sure that you also have the right time and resources at your disposition. So you often need to dialogue with the stakeholders to potentially narrow the scope a bit. And that there's often a tension with the time that you have, the resources that you have, and the needs. So it's very important to get that straight. So this, I'm not trying to give you a headache. I'm just showing you the search string and the complexity of it. It doesn't have to be that way, but in our case it was. So with the help of our expert panel, we built a string which was refined through trial and error. We use a set of benchmark papers, and that is papers that we know should be included. And so we run the string and see if it picks them up. And if it doesn't, we have to modify the string. The reason it looks so complex is because We had to, this is often the case, we had to make it manageable without losing too much accuracy. So if you were to have only a few keywords, let's say nature and climate, you'd have over 80,000 search results in Web of Science alone, and that's just one database. So you have to make it more specific, but not to the extent that you exclude stuff that could be relevant. So it's actually challenging, especially if you have a very broad scope. If you have a very narrow specific scope, you can come up with a few targeted keywords, and that's it. So it doesn't have to be that complex. It really depends on the nature of the exercise. All right, so I'll speed up a bit. This is just to show you I need to update this graph. This is to show you the increase in the body of literature. This is the potentially relevant search results, 65% of which were after 2012. So there's a substantial exponential increase. All right, and we only focused on Web of Science and Scopus, and that was purely because we didn't have the time yet to go into the gray literature. But there's a way that it's possible to do this iteratively. You can look at one set of databases and move on to another. It just depends on your exercise and what you can manage. Software, there's a range of specialist software which can be harnessed to support the process. I'm going to speed up a little bit because it's already almost 19 minutes, but we can talk more about that perhaps in the discussion. Some of these use machine learning. It doesn't always work well, but the idea is to, for example, pull up the most relevant references first when you screen them. The idea being that if you don't find a useful reference after a certain number of screen citations, you might say you've effectively found most of them. In our case, that just didn't happen. Even though we had thousands of things we screened, the software didn't learn, or apparently didn't learn. I mean, maybe it's just not optimal enough. But the general consensus is that tools, including technologies that harness machine learning, are good to support the process. They're not going to replace it for you, but they may make it much more efficient. We used Abstractor for screening abstracts. There are other tools that go all the way through the process of synthesis, and we can talk more about that afterwards. We produced an evidence map. That was the first output. This is available online through our evidence platform, Nature-Based Solutions Initiative evidence.info. And what this is just showing you is the relationship between habitat type and climate impact. It is just a way to visualize where the evidence sits. You can use any sort of categorization. You can look different dimensions, if you will, to see how the literature splits up to make certain gaps explicit, for example. That was a key objective of our exercise. And for mapping, you generally want to extract information, high-level information that allows you to characterize the evidence base. But this is a precursor to synthesis. You need to know what you're dealing with before you can before you know what to synthesize. Unless you have a good understanding of what's out there, you generally go through this process before further analysis. That's just another way to visualize the same thing. This shows you that we had a lot of studies, a lot of cases on created habitats. And the color is the climate impact that intervention addressed. And we also produce maps like this to show you where the evidence sits. And most of it is in China and the United States. That's very common. And most of the literature published is either in high-income countries or in China. Yeah, I know I'm running a bit over time, but hopefully this is okay. We're nearing the end. Critical appraisal. Once you've mapped it, you want to know about how much data you have, so the mapping helps to address that. but you also want to figure out the extent to which each piece of evidence contributes to answering the review question. In our case, as I'll show you in a bit, we are now embarking on evidence synthesis for subsets of questions that fit within that broader scope. And we want, for each of those analyses, we want to know the relevance of a particular study to the question. So if you refine your question, you have to say, is this specific study relevant to it? And the quality, especially if the methodology harnessed by the study is fit for its own aims and conclusion. You know, and there are tools to help with this process, and I'm not going to go into them now. We can talk more about them. They're basically question-based frameworks like this one, which was published in a DEFRA document. This is for quantitative studies which use inferential statistics to derive claims, evidence statements, and so you'd want to use that tool to judge the quality of your study. There are many other ones. This would be one that would be more aligned with a study that was qualitative in nature, the objectives of which, of course, are very different. I'm not going to go into detail here. As I said, our map, so a systematic map is a part of the process of systematic reviewing often. And the broader question was, what is the state of the evidence base? From that, you can derive a number of other questions, and we're currently working on that. The approach to synthesis, so you are synthesizing the material on the map to highlight gaps, knowledge gaps. You might find interesting relationships and you might want to explore them, such as, you know, the fact that the evidence is predominantly from particular areas. Why may that be? You're providing contextual understanding to the problem, and that can vary in complexity. But then you might want to derive more, you might want to produce emergent knowledge, you know, synthesize the whole of that literature. You often have to divide it into subsets. And there are different questions you can address and different methods to address them. Meta-analysis, you know, we're familiar with that. That's, but there are other ways of doing it. Thematic synthesis, it depends on the data that you're extracting. If you don't have quantitative data, if you don't have data on effect sizes, you can't do a meta-analysis. So you might want to harness other approaches. If you want to understand how an intervention was effective, not whether or not it was or how much, if you want to know how, the process, you want to harness studies that were qualitative in nature. And from that, you can, you know, refine a conceptual understanding, which you can then test if you have the data with quantitative approaches. Communicating, the last slide. I went a bit quickly. I apologize. We can go into more depth afterwards. Communicating, the ultimate goal, really. You should go back to your stakeholders at that stage and talk to them about what you found. You should ask the question, how strong is the evidence, to answer my review question. It's basically attributing confidence statements to, confidence assessments to the statements, which is a function of the quantity and the quality of the study, as well as the level of agreement between them. You might have seen this in the context of IPBES reports, where they say, you know, high confidence or general agreement. I can't remember. Oh, well, yeah, these are the terms they use. Yeah, inconclusive, unresolved. That's one approach that IPBES uses. The process by which you do this varies. It can be predominantly expert-led, or it could be done through question-based frameworks. And you then also want to produce shorter, easier to read documents, such as this one that DEFRA commissioned on the links between natural environment and human health. You do your systematic review, and then you boil it down into short documents. And that's simply because policymakers are not going to read your systematic review because they don't have the time, generally. I'm generalizing here, but that's the idea. Here are some, I guess we can send this by email and it'll be recorded, but there are a variety of centers and institutions which bring together and design methods for this process. In environmental science, there's a Center for Environmental Evidence. I think it's in the UK. And then there's also EPI, they focus on developing methods. And they wrote a book called Introduction to Systematic Reviews, from which I drew a lot of things. There are reporting standards, the Cochrane Library Standards. That's where it all started, I think, or at least a lot of it. That's in healthcare. They do a lot of systematic reviews in healthcare. And then there are toolkits to do quality appraisal, such as this reference, if you were to Google it. Toolkit for mixed method studies. I shared that because I think for environmental evidence, mixed methods is extremely important. You often don't have the type of data that you want. Your map will show heterogeneity of data, different contexts, different outcomes, different methodologies. How do you bring that together? And there are ways to do that. And then these are some articles on the methods, which we can talk a bit more about if you're interested. And lastly, it's just a thank you to the team that I work closely with at the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, and many of us are working on evidence syntheses at this time. So yeah, thank you for your attention, and yeah, if you have any questions, I'm ready to have a discussion.
Thanks. Thanks, Alex, for this amazing, brilliant review of the monumental amount of work you've been doing and the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative team have been doing for the past 2 years. Can you please just go ahead and shoot questions, and if it gets too busy, we'll ask you to raise hands, but I think let's open the floor to questions.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Go on, Erika.
Oh, okay. Oh. Thank you for the talk, Alex. I didn't understand when the software comes in, if you have to do the search. Well, the background is that I'm doing a large review for a report that is based on an IPCC sort of type report, but about the Amazon, right? And I'm one of the leading authors. So your talk was extremely useful, but I don't understand when the softwares come in. If you do manually the research, the search of the search terms, that would be a nightmare. Yeah. Or if you use them within the software and you train them with the benchmark papers, etc.
So let's, yeah, I thought this talk was designed for 20 minutes, but it turns out to be a bit longer, so I didn't go into detail. I'm just going back to software.
And also if the software generates that beautiful map that you had.
Software, yeah.
Unfortunately, you need a developer for that.
No.
Yeah.
It's really pretty.
Right. I don't remember what that slide for the software is. Oh, there we go. So your question, yeah, okay, when do you use software? So there is software to help from the start to import and sort references. I'll tell you what I did, which was a relatively simple approach, is I imported everything into EndNote, and I removed, not me, there was other people, we removed the duplicates through EndNote and then through Excel, because EndNote didn't get all of them. Yeah. Now for that process, EPI Reviewer, which costs I think $10 a month per user, and I think it's web-based, has a fuzzy matching approach to identify duplicates. If you have tens of thousands of results, that can help speed up that process. EPI Reviewer, I'm just mentioning it because it's highlighted in the book I was reading. It's a software designed by the Epicenter for their own work, but they've now made it available to everyone. It takes you from the very start until the very end.
Oh, that's great.
You can import your references directly into it. I think it was originally designed to import PubMed references, but it's probably now more comprehensive. So EPI Reviewer calendar also is from start to finish. It was designed. I think Conservation International had a strong input in the development of it. I haven't used it. It's supposed to also go through the process and up until the end. So importing references, removing duplicates, screening, extracting data. So especially for the mapping functions, you can extract some of these softwares allow you to extract and store data, be it quantitative or qualitative. They can also, EPI Reviewer can link to R. So if you're doing a meta-analysis, it can link to R software packages. But the biggest use, yeah, for me, it's really the screening process, I would say, first and foremost. After screening, you know, we went into Excel to log for the database, and as Cecile said, we also have a portal designed in-house, which we use to enter the data, to then visualize it, such as through the heat maps. After, just to go back, so I said I used EndNote, and after that, what we did is we used Abstractor. But Abstractor only allows you to do up to abstract screening.
Okay.
You can't do a full text screening. In contrast to EPI Reviewer, which allows you to do that, Calendar as well, I think, and Kadima. And if you want to know more about these tools, this paper, the online tools to support the process, was published, I think, in 2018. Emma McIntosh was an author. She actually trialed all of these software. She did a systematic review. So that paper is a good reference. If you look at the screen for Abstractor, which we use for abstract screening, you see there are some words highlighted in color. I chose a list of terms to help me screen the abstracts. So itself has active learning, if you enable it, which is, it's supposed to try to identify commonalities between abstracts that are relevant or not relevant to help you with screen the most relevant ones first. But as I mentioned, it didn't work for us. But you can still highlight keywords so that you can read it faster and screen more efficiently. And it also has features like tagging the studies. You know, you might want to record something about that abstract and so forth. And you can do that with multiple people. You can have, I'm not even sure there's a limit on the number of people that can be involved in screening abstracts at the same time. So if you upload 10,000 abstracts, you can split them up. And also do consistency checking to make sure that the people, what's that?
That's free?
It is free. Abstractor is by Brown University. It's free. Sometimes the portal bugs and I can't access it. It's very rare, but it never has crashed in the sense that I've lost anything. I think it's very reliable in that sense. Apart from not being able to access it a couple of times, I've never had any issues, and it's free, but it won't go to full text. What you'll have to do is maybe use EndNotes to download full texts afterwards.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other questions? No, if not, I'll give you a bit of time to think, but I've got a couple. One of them is maybe for Izzy, Alex. It's about critical appraisals. And I know you're going through the phase now of going through all these papers and seeing if they're relevant and the quality of the review. And I was wondering how you developed the methodology and why. So you said you had some existing frameworks to do this, but you decided not to choose one. So yeah, why? And
so yeah, Izzy. Yeah, so two of my colleagues are doing evidence syntheses, Izzy and Isabel Kia and Stephen Voroniecki, and together they came up with a question-based framework to assess relevance and quality, and we all worked together on this. It's very challenging when you're dealing with heterogeneity of study, and you have limited time and resources. So yes, there are existing frameworks, but a lot of them cater to one type of study or another. Some are mixed, allow for studies, mixed types, if you will. But generally the process is that they evaluate them separately. Our challenge was time and resources, and so we had to harness from those frameworks, but we had to focus the assessment to the nature of our question as well. So it's hard to explain without giving it too many details, but we basically picked the elements from those frameworks that we thought were most appropriate to do a quality appraisal of our evidence subset associated with the types of questions we were asking. So just to give you a concrete example, if you were to look at a what works question, you'd want to design that framework to, number one, extract studies that are experimental or quasi-experimental, or have robust counterfactual assessments. And then you'd want to go through a list of questions to assess the quality of those. But in our case, we didn't just have that. We also had some of the syntheses that we do are more about how it works, and we want to extract qualitative studies. And so another set of questions has to be applied. So we had to merge elements from different frameworks to make that process a bit more streamlined and manageable within the time that we have. And it's honestly extremely challenging. But hopefully we can do it.
Thanks. I'm wondering if there are any other questions.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Alex, for sharing your experience. It's really helpful. So for environmental studies, I guess there are many like gray literature, like NGO reports or governmental reports, and even in different language. So like, how would you deal with that?
Yes. All right. Let me go back to. Okay, so to start with, we focused on the peer-reviewed literature. That was a decision we made because we couldn't synthesize everything. We had a very limited team. We also focused only on English to start with because more than 99% of the search results were in English, and so we felt that it was appropriate to start with. Generally, though, as you for systematic reviews and maps, the norm is to go beyond that and to look at the gray literature. We're starting to do that now, actually. So as I said, it could be done through an iterative process. The gray literature. Here there is an article by Neil Hattaway. Neil Hattaway is basically a guru in environmental evidence. And he talks about I don't know if you can see probably you can't see my mouse, but you can see the second article down, Hattaway et al. 2015. This is how you would use Google Scholar in evidence reviews. And there is not, I mean, he talks about how to do it, but it's not as if there is only one way to do it. Some will say we will screen, the first 1,000 results that pop up in Google Scholar that are not peer-reviewed. It depends. In terms of like selecting studies, so how to extract from Google Scholar, we didn't do, and I don't know how. I would have to figure that out. So for instance, I wouldn't know how to import them into Abstractor, but I'm pretty sure that if you can access Google APIs, you might be able to do that somehow. But you can also do it manually. Yeah, you just search and you screen and look at the first 10 pages or something. Or maybe you do that until you don't find anything relevant. It really depends on your question. But at the process of selection, the criteria that you would use generally should be in line with the criteria that you would use for the peer-reviewed literature. Although in Nature, there are often reports and journal articles are very different. So you might have to tweak that a little bit, but the idea is to follow a stepwise process. To make it easier, you might want to do titles first, weed out everything that's an irrelevant title, then you would do the abstracts. Sometimes you do both together, especially if you have a low number of studies. That is something you just need to trial out yourself. The key thing is just to make it explicit. So it's not like it's wrong or right. It's more like, how did you do it, and how would I be able to replicate what you did, basically. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Good. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to ask about search strings. If you don't have such a big team, trying to do a systematic review with one or two authors, could you talk a little bit about refining search strings if you don't have a team that can review several thousand? You could manipulate the search string.
Yes, let's talk about that. To tell you the truth, when we started, in terms of the screening, it was primarily me and Beth, and Cecile also helped afterwards with the coding. But we also had a small team to start with. So I see where you're coming from. Stakeholder engagement first. By that I mean, yeah, who's your target audience? And if you're, well, it depends on the nature of your exercise, but getting experts on board, key informants, let's call them key informants, who know the field very well, they can help you revise the search string. So I would say, if you were to come up with a first draft, what we did is we came up with a first draft, and we used existing literature to draw out the keywords that we thought were most appropriate. And then we submitted that string to Pam, for instance, who was listening, is someone that helped us refine this string, Pam Berry in the Environmental Change Institute. And so you go through an iterative process. You add missing keywords. We started with a 4-part structure, so each box here is the in between that, you don't see it, but it's an and, not an or. So the first is intervention terms, and then the second one is more about the context, like the habitat type, and we use an and in between, and we have a 5-part structure with an and in between each. And that was, initially we started with a 4-part, but that gave us, I think, like 40,000 search results. So we had to add a 5th part, but we had to do it in a way that didn't remove important studies that we knew about through those benchmark papers. So once you see, it's called the scoping process, basically, and you just iteratively do it until I would say your set of benchmark papers is all captured by the string, and the people you're working with think that your string is comprehensive enough. That's how we did it. We didn't test it in every database. We did it in Web of Science, and to some extent in Scopus as well. We didn't go through a lengthy process to test it in other databases, but for us that was sufficient.
And then can I just ask on that, so the categories there with the and are, were you able to use the same script in both Web Science and you didn't use Google Scholar, you used Web Science, and what was the other one you used?
Oh, we use Scopus.
Scopus and Web Science. Were you able to use the same script, or did that have to be modified, like spacing and or as?
Yes. Yeah. So okay. So let's go through that a little bit. So what each of those databases, they have what are called field codes. So the TS there for Web of Science means basically it's topic subject, I think, or topic, whatever. That searches keywords, abstract, title, and I think a couple of other things, subject area. The one in Scopus is called title, abstract, something. So each of those databases has information pages on those field codes, and you can match them. So we match the TS in Web of Science to whatever it is in Scopus, title, abstract, I think it's called. Or I think is the same. But then when it comes to the near operator, so if you type in near one, it means within one word of. And that is different in Scopus, but again, these information pages, if you Google Scopus operators or Web of Science operators, you'll find this. The wildcards as well. Generally, those are kind of standard though. Like a $sign means any character, but only one. A star means any character or any set of characters, etc. So yeah, it takes time to do this, but it's rewarding. What you don't want to do is exclude things. So okay, what do I mean? In Web of Science and Scopus, you can, when you do a search and then you refine it manually with the left, usually it's a left-hand menu, you can click, okay, exclude or limit to. Well, you always want to do limit to, not exclude, because if something is double tagged, so let's say you're just looking for original research, right? And you don't want reviews. You want to click limit to article. Yeah, article is what original research is called. You limit to article. You don't click exclude review because sometimes articles are tagged as both. The same thing with subject areas. You generally don't want to mess too much with the subject areas. Also because there might be relevant stuff in subject areas that you think are irrelevant. So that's what I would say. But hopefully, I don't know how it works now with the situation, but the librarians are very helpful with this, and they have database experts in database searching, and they can help you with that as well. There are other databases that you might want to, if you have time, you might want to go into. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but yeah, I'll remember the name, or if you email me, I'll share it with you. But there are other databases that are often used for environmental evidence.
Oh,
Thank you. We're getting close to the end of time, and I have a burning question I'd really like to hear the answer for. I was wondering, Alex, what you would do differently if you start all over again, a systematic review.
So I think that I would go through, I would allow myself to perhaps go through a bit more of an iterative approach to refine the scope and the concept. We had to do it anyway. To begin, well, so basically we were short on time, or we thought we were short on time. We ended up taking much more longer than we thought anyway. So that's a general lesson, by the way. If you think it's going to take 3 months, probably add a month. Otherwise, you might have some sleepless nights. But I think the lesson is take as much time as you can, and that's what I would do more of, to revise the scope and the conceptual framing. If you have a very simple hypothesis, yeah, you understand the theory, it's so clear, you just want to test it, you can write it out, you know that the literature backs that up, then that's fine. You don't really necessarily need to go through that. But if you don't, if your question is perhaps a bit more complex in nature, and that's often the case with environmental evidence, where, yeah, sure, you can come up with a hypothesis, but is that actually grounded in the context? Does that even make sense? So you might want to take more time to really understand the links between the intervention that you're thinking of, the conceptual links between the intervention and the outcomes. If you clarify that, it allows you to better target your exercise, especially after you map the evidence. You have it structured in a way that you can address more specific questions about these links, for example. So take as much time as you can to start with to define the scope. And the scope is basically, as I give you the example, the PICO structure. So yeah, what's my population of interest or target group? What are the interventions? What are the outcomes? But then go a step further and conceptualize the links if you can. It doesn't have to, if you can't, it doesn't matter, but because you might know so little that you can't do that, which is fine, which is why you would do an evidence map to start with. But take as much time as you can doing that, because it'll save you a lot of time down the line.
Thank you. Thanks. Unless we have any final burning comments, I think I'd like to thank Alex for this introduction. Really great, thank you. We have the recording that will be available. I can either send it to you whenever you need before the website is available, but it will also be available on the website when we launch a new website. Thanks so much. It's been great, and we will send you details about the next seminars coming up soon.
Okay. Thank you, Cécile.
Merci.
Thanks for everyone. Merci à tout le monde. And thank you, Carlin, as well. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.